You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song, Ma.
What restrictions should be placed on free speech? Almost none if it's up to us. So last time we talked about aggression and consent. And we talked most of the time about aggression, and we arrived at, I think you arrived at it, that inappropriate aggression, you can have all kinds of aggression, but inappropriate aggression, unacceptable aggression, is where force is used on somebody else.
And I mean, you can use force and not be aggressive in the pure definition of it requires an aggressive act is where you take something away from somebody. Now, you have to use force because people don't want to give it to you. They don't want to give you their stuff. So it's not just force, but force is a means to an end. The end is aggression. Something is taken away from a person and that person does not want to give it. That's aggression in my book. And
kind of goes back to the language of libertarians, the non-aggression principle. And of course, I'm trying to get in my mind, is a lie or a misrepresentation aggression, and you say no, not until it results in force.
No, see, I'm not standing on that force variable. You are. You're assuming. See, I think you could lie to somebody and take something away from them and not use force. I mean, not force.
You can misrepresent. You can
you
sell
can
someone
cheat.
something.
You can cheat in all kinds of ways. You don't have to use force. Force is the more barbaric way.
Oh, okay. Well,
but no, we probably have more cheating going on without force nowadays than we do with force.
But wouldn't you say that lying about, say you're selling a product, lying about your product, there's nothing, that's not inappropriate aggression until you sell it to me with that understanding between us. Until I lose something because of your lie, your misrepresentation, then that's unacceptable and I should have recourse to.
Well, that's probably yes. So that's like you got a lot of variables packed in there. Yeah. I don't know if all of that I can agree with, but force, of course, is wrong.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be using force because a person doesn't want to give it to you. So you're going to have to force them, like, hold up with a gun. You're going to hold somebody up with a gun. Mm-hmm. That's force. And that's...
Well, the thing, really, what I was interested in was the other end of it, which is you were saying, hey, people can lie to you. They can misrepresent, lie. That's all okay.
Well, it's not necessarily okay. It's probably unethical, but it's not aggression. It's not a crime. Truth in advertising. I mean, is it a crime to advertise false stuff? I mean, this does get into the gray area about what it is Jefferson said, without free informed, or was that John Adams? Without free informed citizens, the country can't exist. And I'm beginning to really believe in that. This country looks to me like the critical thinking has gone to zero practically. Given the fact that human nature, that we all cheat all the time, whether we know it or not, that's human nature. I mean, it's kind of like biblical. We have a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. We're all going to be the devil, and we're not going to find it out until we've already sinned. Okay, so given that, that's the fabric, and people need to be a little bit on guard for cheating. Not paranoid, you want to trust, but I mean, people are going to do it. They're going to spin it. They're going to try to manipulate you. They're going to try to schmooze you, and they're going to try to sell you on their position. And their position's going to benefit them first, probably. I mean, there is
even if they think they're doing it for everybody else.
Yeah. They get their jollies out of it. Somewhere, somebody's getting their jollies out of it.
So let me touch on consent real quick, because I think we had kind of resolved that in a similar way, is that because I brought up consent and then consent about something, consequence of the transaction happens years later. Like I consent to have my college son play football and he has brain damage 40 years later. Is that truly consent?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it is consent. First of all, everyone's an adult making decisions.
Don't we have an age of consent? I mean, don't we consider that
18?
Is it 18?
I think 18.
Yeah,
is 18.
An 18-year-old can consent to things legally. They can sign a document legally.
And, it isn't as if it's a secret out there about. And I can tell you, from the little bit of football I played, it was no secret that was probably harmful to my brain.
Sort of intuitive, actually.
Yeah.
If you didn't know it was harmful to your brain, you knew it was harmful to the rest of your body.
That's right. Yeah, well, you break bones, so you know for sure it's harmful to the rest of your body. so.
Oh, a broken bone.
That's right.
Like that pit bull walking around on its broken leg. I'll just ignore that.
But these two topics are really part of what is free speech. I mean, I see them as.
So where does free speech fit into this?
So let's talk about free speech. You're the journalist and the psychologist, and I'll take the libertarian, or we'll both take the libertarian stance. But
you talk libertarian, I'll talk journalism and psychology.
Okay, I'll try to.
We'll share. We'll collaborate.
But consistent with what we've just talked about, with aggression and consent, I would say free speech is anything anybody wants to say.
Yeah. There are almost no rules on free speech.
There are no rules about free speech. Now, the example of yelling fire in a crowded theater. Now, that was
malicious.
Well,
speech.
that was speech that had a consequence. I mean, people are reacting to a lie. That would kind of go along with misrepresenting your product or something.
Yeah. So the first thing we do when we say an absolute, like all speech is free and it should be tolerated and it's a problem. First thing we do is come up with a exception, and I think every exception would have to be debated very carefully because of the harm it would do to say there's speech that's not okay. Because when you start, someone has the power to say some speech is not okay, then you've got real big problems. So it's not that some speech is not okay, as we all know some speech isn't okay, but who decides is the issue with that.
Well, and that's always the issue.
Always the issue is power corrupts.
So
every single time.
Yeah. All these great ideas boil down to who decides.
Who's got the scepter?
That's right. But now I've made the argument before that free speech should be restricted if someone is actually promoting violence. If they are recruiting and directly recruiting violence.
Yeah.
Say, you 10 people I'm talking to, you need to go home right now, go get your guns, and let's go shoot this guy. That is unacceptable free speech.
Promoting crime. So, I don't know much about this area. I only know about the system dynamic of information flow. Okay. But I don't know about hate speech. I don't know the law about hate speech. I don't know what the definition is. And so in a civilized society, you want to be sensitive to words that are used for something improper. Let's just leave it at that. But it's so easily corrupted by the left. The left is very sensitive and tender-minded. They have a high value for tenderness and harm. And so they want you to shut the hell up. They don't want you to say anything. In fact, my experience living with the psychologists, they have a serious problem with conflict avoidance. And I do believe that's where it comes from, which is a lot of shut the hell up, you're being mean, that message comes.
Yeah.
And what you do to a system when you shut it up is you shackle it so it can't solve its problems.
Right. So that's the other end of free speech.
And that's what the true journalists have a moral obligation to inform the citizen as much as possible to information that they need in order to solve problems. And this tendency nowadays to shut up except for the propaganda, it's a bad, bad tendency.
Well, as we commented last time, the tender-minded liberal end of the world used to be in favor of free speech, used to be in favor of anyone can say anything and we can jaw about it.
I don't know if tender-minded people really did.
Okay.
I'm not sure. You know, my mother always said if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all, which is the wrong.
Bullshit.
Yeah, and then she married my father. Which is a psychology behind that. So she's like an introvert and kind of tender-minded, I think, but very humanistic, I think. It's like she's so introverted, I'm not sure I knew her very well. She's a sweetheart, and other people told me more about her than I knew about her. But anyway, she would have that, we can't have a conflict, or, if you kids are fighting, go outside. One of you goes out, she split us up. I mean, the parents need to, split kids up. But then she marries a bomb thrower, my father, who's just very happy to throw grenades into social situations and blow them up, for good purpose. I mean, he fought the Klan before he fought the Klan before it was popular to fight the Klan.
He harnessed that energy of his, but I watched him with you family members. It was, if things were peaceful for more than about 5 or 10 minutes,
he got bored.
He would get bored and he'd start jacking with.
He would jack everybody at the table up.
That's right.
Everybody would feel so miserable. And so that's who she married. And that she knew that when she married him. That's a characteristic. I mean, he is like a Humphrey Bogart kind of guy, a tough guy. He identified with the toughness of that masculine ideal back in the 40s. Mm-hmm. It's just like so that's a thing in psychology. If you don't have it, you'll marry it.
Yeah.
So you project. So how does that work? You suppress it in yourself, but you can't get rid of the need for a certain amount of it. That's why it's pretty interesting. I take on the Joan of Arc position in my community because I don't have, my aggression's not suppressed. I'm an aggressive person. I hope it's contained and directed. So I take on that role, and then I immediately have some men in the community attracted to me. Want to be helpful, want to be friends, and I mean, not attraction, not sexual, romantic, but just you're attracted to people that have the same ideals you have and things like that. And I wonder, like, how do those guys? And one of them, my good friend Gig. I mean, I chastise him all the time for not being aggressive enough. I mean, he's a sweetheart. He avoids conflict, and that's like you need to get in there and mix it up, make trouble. So we're talking about aggression. Okay, so that brings us back around to, is that aggressive? When you get in a situation and you make trouble, so you wind up debating something, is that aggressive? No. You don't take anything away from anybody. That's not really aggressive.
Well, and we are, between you and me, we are very clear that this business about people can't say things that offend other people, to restrict free speech because it might offend somebody is ridiculous.
In fact, it's toxic to a fully functioning human being. And in psychology, this is why it's so fascinating to watch the psychologists help suppress, because they're leftists, They help suppress information flow when in fact our job as a clinician is to create high levels of information flow.
Our training.
Our training is bring it out of the unconscious where it's suppressed, bring it out of the unconscious where it's repressed, bring it out in the family unit where it's not talked about. You know, if you have a kid that's been molested, you want them at the right time to talk about it with anybody they want to be able to talk about it with, including their attacker. I mean, that is the road to recovery of regaining the self. So, I mean, it's just amazing to me. I mean, we psychologists are hypocrites.
Psychologists of all people are the ones helping suppress free speech.
I think so. And then you see how much they hate Donald Trump for being the poster child of free speech. I mean, Donald Trump will say anything, and they don't. I mean, he mixes it up all the time with people. He says a lot of things that none of us would say. I mean, he's changing he's resetting the needle for free speech, and so you think about why a system would do that. Well, in my view, we've gone so crazily over to the political correctness, which political correctness is, by definition, my definition, is the suppression of free speech. Mm-hmm. You can't say that because somebody will feel upset because you think or feel or observe that. That's political correctness.
Give me the quote from your psychologist who was talking about someone on the listserv making a comment that offended her.
Oh my God. So we have a guy that's like in crisis, and he's posting on the...
He's halfway crazy.
I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying that. You said that.
Well,
but
he reminds me of all the...
You're going to get yourself
guys.
Sued if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's right, because he would do it.
Okay, but he's extremely verbal and very upset, in my view, for good reason.
Yeah.
So he's very, very upset. So he's posting these, what someone could say, rather outrageous statements. I mean, he's alienating people by his post. Okay, but that's another story, and which I'm not.
Yeah, we'll never talk about that one.
Well, it's just not my business. It's not my business. But anyway, what is my business is then, I think the president-elect, or whatever role she has, she says, I'm president of LPA, and she says, you need to tell him not to do that. And I said, why? Because it's upsetting to me, she said, and anything that upsets me is not okay. Anybody posting something that's upsetting is not okay. And I thought, isn't that psychology? Isn't that psychotherapy 101, is to realize that when you're upset, it's your problem. It's not that person's problem. They are themselves. They either said something appropriate or inappropriate. They will be impacted by the consequences of their speech. But your reaction is your reaction based on your complex psychology. So that's grist for the mill of like, why did I react that way? What bothers me about that? You want to regain that sense of self rather than hang that on everybody else. You empower yourself when you give away your emotional reaction that freely to anyone who has words that trigger your upsetness. I'm thinking, are you listening to yourself, girl?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what happened to psychology? But this is the end of that story. She wants me to inhibit free speech on the listserv. And I just said, I refuse. I can't promote free speech in the Psychology Times in the community, which I created the newspaper. Yeah, I created a newspaper because we had been trashed. Our whole community had been cheated and trashed by secrecy in those in power. And so I created a newspaper to help compensate, or not compensate, to help overcome
And inform.
and inform. Well, a newspaper as a community intervention. A good journalist and a good newspaper is a community intervention that helps protect the rights of the citizens. I mean, it's not, the trouble that's happened is it used to be an honorable profession that didn't pay a heck of a lot. But now all you get, everybody's self-esteem is attached to money, and you can't really, there are no professions. I don't know that there are no professions, but journalism looks like it's lost its traction in a profession that is related to being a valuable human being because you have a profession like you're a journalist is a noble profession that doesn't pay a whole lot.
Yeah.
That looks like that has taken a big hit. But so the journalist of the past did the Lord's work, informed the citizen of information that the citizen could then use if the citizen wasn't apathetic and lacked an independent sense of self and a reason for existence. The citizen could then use that information to improve their quality of life and the quality of life of their family and their friends. But now, where do we see that? I don't see that. I mean, digging out, even YouTube is going to shit. I mean, it used to be YouTube looked like a free speech alley kind of thing. Now we definitely have a corrupted YouTube. I mean, just over the last 6 months or so, it's been corrupted. It used to be free speech alley. Everybody could post whatever they want. It was a source of information. Now you have to really dig it out. It's probably there.
You can usually find it.
But then there's also reports of them censoring things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so now it's censored. Now it's crap.
Yeah.
Now it's
I just saw, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, but they were doing an interview with an ex-head of CBS. And he made the statement that when in his early days, the news media, journalism had a liberal leaning. And he said...
True, classic liberalism, freedom.
He said now it is complete liberal bias. And let me finish.
Yeah.
And his comment was he doesn't think it can come back to where it should be. He said, I think the best that we can do is admit to the bias and be open about it. That the different news organizations go ahead and admit what their bias is and continue to be biased. Don't pretend let's not pretend that we're simply reporting the news.
Well, of course, that's a step in change, but I disagree with him vehemently about that because that does not make sense for human systems. That you get a bunch of propaganda. I mean, the fact is, yes, I agree totally that everybody has to realize how much propaganda there is out there. Now, you brought up an important point, and I'm sure this may be a point for later, is that the classic liberals, I'm a classic liberal, and I think where did classic liberalism go? To libertarian. Is that you mind your own business, people can do whatever they want to do, that's liberal, that's classic liberalism. Liberalism is like, I tolerate all types of differences. I tolerate all kinds of people. I tolerate it. But now, what they call liberal is really in-group leftism. And you can call them socialist. I don't think there's a good word for them except the left.
Loyalty to the group rather than
loyalty to the group. That's a good thing to say because now the group identity predicts the value system rather than the value system predicting the group identity.
Right.
The value system is gone in them and maybe in the right, but I don't think the group. I mean, I want to study this more. I think the right is too fragmented in their values to be a total in-group the way the left is. My question is, does the left, in the cycle of nations, the life cycle of nations, is it always the left that takes the total group down and destroys it?
be an interesting.
I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. Is it my thought is it may always be, although I'm sure nations have been taken down by the in-group favoritism of the right. You know, when you get where the subgroups are calling the shots, you're in a serious problem as a system.
Yeah.
So that's like letting a child run the household,
Yeah.
and the parents are absent. And that's a system dynamic that takes a lot of study.
So is there anything else about free speech you want to say?
Just
I
that
think
all speech should be tolerated unless it can be debated. That it's, I mean, just free speech is really open information flow, and that is a critical dynamic of living systems. You have to have information flow or you can't function as a system. So somehow the founders, and I see now they just studied this, they knew this from all kinds of wise philosophy before, that was, I mean, they did come back and put it in the Bill of Rights. So it was like, hey, now we're thinking about our first draft and we have a lot of errors in our first draft. So how do we correct them? Oh, the Bill of Rights. I mean, everybody that's done that, anybody that's done organizational change knows, like, you have to come back like, wait a minute, we forgot about this. This is important. We should have put this in our first draft, but our first draft is already published. So they come back, and the first thing they do is say that people are free and that information is open. Mm-hmm. I mean, can you get better than that? These guys were geniuses in psychology.
Yeah, they were.
They were geniuses.
I mean, there were a couple of, well, now, 200 or however many years later, where you see that the country has deviated from the Constitution.
Yeah.
You can maybe come up with some ideas that the founders could have done differently to control for that. But man, they were brilliant.
Well, did they come up with as many controls as they could, and then we screwed over their controls? Is that the question, or did they miss it? I don't think they missed very much. I mean, they had as many, it looks to me like they had as many checks and balances on the abuse of power as you can probably put in there. But does anybody follow them anymore? Almost. Like our own board in our own state legislating separation of powers. They don't even understand separation of powers. They don't understand why, and they don't understand how they abuse it.
And even when they understand it, they have no intention of following.
Well, you say that, and you're probably right.
Yeah. So in conclusion, what is the point of all this talk about free speech? Is it really so bad if our smartest people exclude some offensive words and topics from acceptable discussion? Yes, that is bad, because we can never truly solve our problems unless all sides can speak openly and thoroughly without fear. Now for the episode footnotes. LPA is the Louisiana Psychological Association, in which Julie just completed her 2-year term as president. The Psychology Times is Julie's online newspaper, which has received close to 100 awards of excellence from the State Press Association. Julie comes from a small-town newspaper family, with her parents owning the Coshada Citizen, which also received its share of awards.